Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show, Crosstalk. Well, today will be Joe Biden's first major international outing. Not that he's actually going to be leaving the White House. It will all be done via video conference, but it will be at the annual Munich Security Conference. It takes place every year in February, but this year it's all virtual. Before that, he will be having a closed session talk with the leaders of the G7. So Biden will be giving a speech, and the theme of his speech will be the theme that he echoed 2 years ago, which is America is back, and the good old days of the transatlantic alliance and the great friendship of the Europeans and the Americans, the rule-based international order, everything is back, and the Trump years were just like a nightmare that we have to overcome.
Getting the band back together.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. All the good old days are back. You can think of Adenauer and Reagan, Thatcher. Just the whole panoply of transatlantic figures. The problem for Biden is that no one's really in the mood to submit themselves to American leadership. So the notion that he's going to come back and say, America is back, and the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, UK will all be happy to embrace America's agenda is just not on. What Biden is seeking to do, as far as we can tell, is to put together some kind of a transatlantic alliance directed at Russia and to a lesser extent against China. So he still wants somehow the Germans to give up on Nord Stream 2. He wants NATO to be actively involved in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and to take, to be much more critical in its diplomatic and commercial stance towards China. The problem, as far as the Europeans are concerned, is that that Russia is an important partner, as many of them see it. It's a neighbor, and the United States isn't really offering anything substantive. So the Europeans are being asked to give up real commercial economic advantages for what exactly? What's the United States offering other than a lot of words and unpleasant military entanglements that Europeans may be getting a little tired of for the last 20 years? What's your take, Peter?
Well, it's interesting is that it's a common parlance for the left to say Trump was an interruption, aberration, blah blah blah. Okay, well, I think that some of the hesitations that the Europeans have now have been in the making for quite a long time. Okay, for policymakers in Brussels to represent the European Union and the United States is that there's just been this very, very like a glacier moving, coming to terms with the end of the Cold War. And that's over a quarter of a century ago, but they haven't been able to really reassess because as the New York Times was putting it, the Biden administration, and I think this is like Blinken is behind this more, and Sullivan, is they want to create a united front, a democratic front against the anti-democratic states of Russia and China. Well, that's okay for low octane thinkers reading the New York Times. That's simple to understand, but it misses the point completely because nations have interests, okay? And couching it in an alliance against an anti-democratic Russia and China, well, that's Cold War mentality, okay? But that's not reality today. what's really been in play over the last decade. Let's go back to 2007 when Putin gave his very dramatic, I would even say, pushback
Yeah,
against.
just to follow up, incident, it's an interesting development. Putin will not be attending
Okay, there you go.
Security Conference. So,
well, maybe they'll get a tongue lashing from Lavrov. We'll see. Okay, but the Europeans have realized that with the end of the Cold War, they no longer are so solely dependent upon the United States, because if you look at the trade deals, what would become the European Union after the Second World War, going into the new century, was very preferential. And remarkably enough, somebody like Donald Trump said, well, these are rich countries. I mean, why are we giving them such a good deal? Okay, but that was part of the Cold War package, if we can put it that way, is that we'll lead the alliance. You will be the junior partner. We'll pay a lion's share for it, and we'll give you preferential trade agreements. Okay, and it worked. But then to a certain point, is that why are we subsidizing Germany, the richest country in Europe, and it's eating our lunch? Okay,
that's the thing. It was, I mean, the idea behind this was that they will submit to American hegemony, and in return for that, they will be allowed to emerge as economic giants. And it wouldn't really matter. America could still go on running a massive trade deficit because of the dollar as a reserve currency. So it all worked quite nicely until, of course, realize, the dollar is not what it was. And these economic powers are indeed eating America's lunch. So now that you can't any longer justify this arrangement by any great threat, then someone like Trump comes along and says, well, what the hell is all this about? We're giving up all of this with a view to what? Who exactly is the enemy when our own industry is being wiped out?
Yeah, and what we have too with this anti-Russia propaganda industry, which is a grift for so many people here, and you had major events like the forceful breakup of Yugoslavia by NATO countries. We can cite the Georgia's machinations in South Ossetia in August 2008. Then we have in the spring of 2014 the illegal overthrow of the democratically elected government in Ukraine. And it's always easy to say, well, it's all Russia's fault for all of these things here. And of course, there's a very different narrative to counter that. We won't go into it right now. But they've created Russia as the enemy, and as a result, Russia's turned around and said, well, we have options here, and it's one of our, you're a neighbor, you don't want to tango, that's fine. Okay, we heard that from Lavrov unmistakably when Joseph Borrell was there in Moscow. And then we have the Chinese. So this is the totally different dynamic. You can't keep using this Cold War paradigm, because now you have a growing entente, not an alliance, entente with China and Russia. And the Europeans are to say, but they're our major trade partner. I mean, we need these guys, and they've agreed to invest in our bloc. Okay, I mean, the Biden people are thinking it's infantile thinking. The world is changing so fast. As you've wasted so many resources in the Middle East, look how the world has changed.
Right, okay? That's exactly right, and the emergence of China as this economic giant is directly affecting America's relationship with its NATO partners. I mean, for instance, only recently, China held a conference with a number of East European and Central European states, again, with a view to encouraging Chinese investment. There's going to be Chinese vaccines coming into Europe. So now these East European and Central European powers, these are the ones that the America relies on as, to engender enthusiasm and energy into its NATO, into its military alliances. But if they're also now becoming enamored of China, then again, trying to keep this NATO enterprise going, it's going nowhere. So what is it now doing with NATO? It's trying to push NATO into the Middle East. We just had the other day an announcement that NATO will be transferring forces to Iraq to train the Iraqi forces to fight ISIS. Now,
hasn't the U.S. helped Iraq enough, George?
Exactly. So keep in mind, the Iraqi parliament has already asked all foreign forces to leave the country. And keep in mind also that there is always a direct correlation between American military presence and the rise of ISIS. If you want to see ISIS rise, you want American forces to be there.
Give it oxygen. Give it oxygen.
That's right. So for NATO to announce, well, we're increasing our presence in Iraq to 4,000 forces. So absolutely guaranteed 100%, ISIS is going to be a major, major problem in Iraq within a few months. And so this America is back package that Biden is selling. You never wonder, what European government in its right mind is going to buy into this.
Yeah, I mean, except for people that, NATO is a grift. That's exactly what it is. And you have these Atlanticists in the European Union that want to keep it going. But is it really in the bloc's interest? Okay, and see, this is the tension that is building up here. Nord Stream 2 is the best example of all of this, okay? The Germans are, as Texas is freezing, this is a cold winter in Europe and in Russia, it's cold, okay? And you have this a pipeline that the Germans wanted, okay, when it was started. They already had Nord Stream 1. The Germans said, hey, let's get the second one because we need relatively cheap, environmentally friendly energy. I mean, natural gas is the best, okay?
Exactly. And reliable, as what we found in the United States, is these alternative energy sources are not reliable. Again, it kind of confirms what Trump was saying, which is, you invest in all of this, they are not reliable. And yes, Texas, of all places, a kind of energy-rich Texas, is suddenly brought to a complete standstill. I mean, it's really a disgrace.
And then these elites that continue the Atlanticist mirage, as I would call it, is the Russians will make the Europeans dependent on them for energy, and and they'll cut off Ukraine and all that. Is that one of the great things that is misunderstood about Russia is that Russia likes to make money. Russians like to make money. This is a economic project. We're the seller, you're the buyer, here's the bank. Right. All right. Why would anyone in the Kremlin want to screw that up? Okay.
Exactly. And that goes back. It goes back, in fact, to the Soviet era, because those of us of an older generation will remember the gas pipeline deal that caused a huge problem, transatlantic problem, in the early days of the Reagan administration, when the Reagan people were trying to stop the Europeans, buying gas from the Soviet Union. The one thing everybody had to acknowledge at that time, that the Soviet Union was a very, very reliable provider of natural gas. It's not in their interest to start messing around with providing resources.
And one of the differences then than now is that the Soviet Union was desperate for hard currency, and they were selling this for I guess Deutschmarks or something, whatever it was back then. Okay. Oh, no, maybe they did it all in dollars. But again, there would be no reason for doing this. Now, where did the unreliability come from? Not from Russia, from Ukraine. Okay. Oh, that's why they built the pipelines in the first place. Remember?
Right.
Okay. Right. So, but the single biggest difference in all of this, to get away from this Cold War mentality, is that the world economic system is changed dramatically. Right. And for the first time in 500 years, you have a non-European power that is a peer to the West. That's China. And the Russians all understood this a long time ago. And they've been dealing, it's a business relationship. I mean, in the 1960s, I mean, it was most of the so-called experts were completely unaware that communist China and communist Soviet Union, you know, they had border scuffles. I mean, they hated each other. They were
I think that's a very good point what you just said, because when you talk about the non-European powers, because of course Japan did emerge by the 1960s as a major economic power, but Japan's foreign policy was entirely subsumed by the United States. So Japan did not pursue an independent foreign policy, or an independent security policy, entirely happy to be a kind of a junior partner to the United States. So it was never really seen as a major rival to the United States, though it was non-European. China's a different case, because China is both a commercial and economic rival, and it pursues an independent foreign policy. Its security policy is not subsumed under the United States. So therefore, it is a serious issue. And the whole idea of a kind of a global democratic crusade against Russia and China is entirely nuts, because it just brings the two powers together. And I think the Europeans are sort of realizing this. So this whole America is back. So great. Now we're going to have Russia and China together against us. So as when you said at the beginning, they don't have a military alliance as yet. Well, hey, if you want to ensure that they do have a military alliance, yeah, keep up this global democratic crusade thing.
I think it's in this month of this year. You have China, Russia, and Iran having naval exercises in the Indian Ocean. I mean, how did that come about? Did that come about organically, naturally? No, it was because of the hostility coming from the Atlantists, coming from Washington think tanks. Okay, that's where it came from. And so, you know, the Europeans, out of necessity, and, you know, I put little stock in them, you know, doing the right thing, but sometimes you're forced to do something like the right thing, is that the world is getting bifurcated. Okay, and if the Europeans stay under the wing of the United States, they will be irrelevant. Okay, but if they can sustain themselves by having a vibrant and prosperous relationship with Russia, which will happen eventually, but certainly with China, then they are the third player. Okay, in terms of blocks. I mean, the thing is that Europe has a lot of problems, and you and I have talked about it for years. Okay, but compared to the rest of the world, it is still an economic powerhouse. It has a lot of ingenuity, technologies. It has everything it needs. Okay, it has everything it needs to do that, and it's realizing that, because again, we can go back to the Nord Stream, is that why should Europe allow a foreign country, not Russia, but the United States, to determine its energy security? And a lot of Europeans are thinking that, is that, you know, we have this, and by having this kind of energy relationship with Russia, we have leverage. We have leverage too, which is good for a healthy relationship.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's that Europe could indeed be a major power, you know, a part of the West, but independent of the United States. And, you know, this has always been a kind of an American nightmare, that there won't be a West dominated by the United States, but that there'll be essentially two Wests. There'll be the West of the United States, and then there is also the West of Europe, and then there's, of course, Russia and China. This is something the United States really does not want to do, and it has always been alarmed. You know, even during the Cold War, whenever somebody in Europe, you know, whether it's Willy Brandt pursuing an Ostpolitik, and then later on when Mitterrand and Chirac talked about a European security and defense identity, America just crushed this. Even under Trump, you remember, I think when Macron talked about maybe, you know, we'll have a European dimension to NATO. No, absolutely not. So America does not want Europe at any point to emerge as any sort of an alternative West. And that, you know, it was why I think Europeans may look back nostalgically to the days of Donald Trump quite soon, because, you know, at least with Trump, you know, he says, I'm interested in America. You know, that's my goal, which means that the Europeans themselves have said, okay, well, if you're interested in America, we're interested in ourselves. You know, that's what we're supposed to do. So now they're going to have America is back. And once again, Europeans are being told, hey, you've got to think about the Western alliance, this alliance of democracies. That's what it's all about. Forget your national interest. It's all about this alliance.
Well, and also the other big change that we've had since the end of the Cold War is that we had Brexit, and the UK was always the stand-in for the United States. Because as we said in our video yesterday, is that the United States has always pushed to have NATO and the European Union to be the same thing, to be completely aligned. Well, that's thrown completely out of whack because the UK went on its own. So the cohesion there is not what, because Obama, I mean, talk about meddling in other people's politics. Obama made it very clear if there's Brexit, the UK will get at the bottom of the queue for a trade deal. Talk about meddling in another country's election.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So, I mean, the thing is for the Biden people is that they're saying, no, stop the tape and rewind, and then we'll pick up where we left off in January 2017. You can't do that, okay? Because too many things are happening at the same time. And also, I mean, we're talking about the Munich Security Conference, but we also have the Biden administration, a true pivot to Asia in a way, is it creating some kind of containment of China, which as we have said before, South Korea, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, Vietnam, you want them all get in the same club. It's not going to work, folks, okay? It's not going to work. It's been 75 years since the end of the Second World War in Asia. And how do people feel about the Japanese? Hasn't changed much, okay? There's this incessant push to pull Japan and South Korea together. The problem is they don't like each other very much.
No, that's exactly right. So, and bringing them in, with Vietnam, no, I mean, it's not going to happen. And again, they really don't need to get themselves into any sort of a military confrontation with China. So it's a doomed enterprise, as were all American attempts to replicate the NATO military model in other parts of the world. I mean, for a variety of reasons, the NATO model worked for a while in Europe. It stopped working. Even before the end of the Cold War, it was already becoming problematic. Because Europe had its own interests, didn't really see that constant aggravation with the Soviet Union was in its interest. But at least it survived the end of the Cold War. Starting this up in Asia makes absolutely no sense.
Look, NATO is not the norm. NATO is the exception, okay? Because there was a compelling reason to have a military alliance after the Cold War. We had the Warsaw Pact, we have NATO. We had two major military blocs sitting right next to each other and hostile. And the origins of that hostility was ideology, okay?
Right. But I think, as I say, I mean, I think that made sense up until the 1970s. But once Germany realized that its interest was improvement of relations with East Germany, and a kind of de facto reunification, which is what Ostpolitik was, then it made no sense for America constantly saying, coming along and saying, well, you got to follow us, you got to pursue this anti-Soviet policy.
And you must take these missiles. You must take
exactly all of that. The Germans really didn't think that was in their interest. Their interest was some form of reunification with their fellow Germans. So it was already then a clear rift that was emerging in Europe. Then the Soviet Union sort of imploded. But it worked for a short while. But as you say, it can't be the norm elsewhere. But all the other attempts to replicate NATO, all those the Middle East NATO and NATO in Southeast Asia, none of them got off the ground.
Well, the interesting thing, the law of unintended consequences, it comes into play because the every single U.S. administration was very pro-EU in its structure, because then it's easier to control. It's a one block. And so that happened, okay? But then the law of unintended consequences, it got to a certain strength, they would say, well, why do we really need you? Okay, I mean, we've done the project, okay? As flawed as it is, it's there. And because of that, you start recognizing interests, okay? Like, for example, during times of austerity, and particularly right now, do we really need to spend hundreds of billions of euros on defense against a bogus threat? But at the end of the day, with the exception of the Baltic republics and maybe the Poles, okay, and a few other people that are on the Atlantis' payroll, I mean, most people come to the conclusion is that, nah, not really.
That's right. That raises a very, very interesting point. The Atlantis' payroll, which is what happens, which is you buy up an elite in a variety of countries that parrot the whole Atlantis' talking points about the threat from Russia and so on. Hence, which is why so much money is poured into all these NATO fellowship programs, Atlantic fellowship programs. You're buying up an elite so that they come to power, and and they sing from the same sheet, which is, oh my God, Russia is on the march, and so on. But ultimately, it's a very undemocratic concept. I mean, basically, Europeans don't identify that way. I mean, if you look at somebody like Viktor Orban, this is Hungary. Orban is as anti-communist as you can get. And Hungary is about as anti-communist and as anti-Russian as you can get. But they realize, hey, there are good deals to be had with Russia. Kinds of energy deals, vaccine. I mean, Orban is buying his vaccines from the Russians. So they're already they're getting out of the whole Cold War mindset, as countries should. I mean, what's in their interest, rather than refighting wars from 60 years ago.
And why, for the average person, an average business owner in the European Union, why should Ukraine be a make or break issue? Because at the end of the day, the sanction regime that the European Union imposed upon Russia after the events in Ukraine is that the European Union is the net loser economically. And what it has done for Russia, which I'm completely supportive, import substitution. So we don't need your dairy goods anymore. We'll never need them again. We don't need your produce. We will never need them again. Right. Okay. I mean, so what they did was that not only did they suspend a lucrative economic trade tie, is they lost it. It wasn't interrupted. It was lost. And more and more people are coming to that conclusion. So, Joe Biden wants to get the band together again. Right. Well, the other members have found other gigs. Okay. Right. Sorry. Right. It's just, we don't need oldies but goodies anymore. Okay.
Right. No, that's exactly it. And, even now with this whole Navalny business, the Europeans are having problems coming up with a sanctions package. I mean, so, despite all of the whole aggravation with the Borrell visit and so on, and the demands of Navalny, they're having difficulties because, they come up with sanctions. The Russians retaliate, and they said, you impose sanctions, we impose sanctions on you. And then, of course, you have European businesses and say, we're losing business, as of course, French farmers lost a lot of business as a result of the sanctions, because now the Russians weren't buying their agricultural products. That's a big deal.
The Austrians got clobbered by the sanctions.
Right.
I mean, other people don't know, but Austria is a agricultural, milk products, cheese products. It's a big deal for them, and they lost all of it. Right. And they're furious about it. Okay. Right. Speaking of Joseph Borrell, if we can just go to the sidebar here. I mean, after his disastrous performance in Moscow, he's being tipped to have the Biden administration and the European Union broker some kind of talks with Iran, which is very, very interesting here. Okay. Right. And that may be some kind of carrot. Who knows? But Joe Biden, just listen up. you've been in foreign affairs for half a century. You haven't left your mark. I don't think you're going to leave it now because no one wants to come to your party.
No, that's right. Because he was a classic Cold War creature. You know, he came to Congress in 1972, and that was his mentality. He just thought, well, once the Cold War is over, everything will just continue as before. We'll have NATO. It will be the supreme, ruler of the world. We'll have interventionism, humanitarian interventionism. We'll have war on terror. There'll always be something for NATO to do. That's Biden's mindset. So when he addresses that to his at Munich Security Conference, all these transatlantic projects that he has in mind, he's going to find listeners, we're not really interested. I mean, it's like there are other things going on in the world than the transatlantic gravy train.
Yeah, I mean, and at the end of the day, there's more than there are multiple major players on the planet right now, and I really want to stress because I think particularly for the Anglo-Saxon world is that in looking at Western media. Like the cable and the main broadsheets, they still are captured by a Cold War mentality. And it's like wearing a bad a pair of prescription glasses. You're just not seeing the world as it is. Okay, these people, and again, this is a career. Okay, these are career people that they generate their incomes by creating threat inflation. Everything's threat inflation. Okay, that's what keeps them going. Okay, but at the end of the day, you don't need to spend the money. It could be better spent. And why create confrontation when it is completely unnecessary? China is no direct military threat to the United States. Okay, and then you have Tom Cotton, of all people, coming out and saying he wants to mandate it through Congress that if China attacks or invades Taiwan, that means they're at war with China. I mean, again, who are you? Who died and left you, God? Right, yeah. The United States to open up diplomatic relations with China during the Carter administration was an understanding that Taiwan is a part of China. Okay.
Right. Yeah. No. That's right. I mean, this kind of a complete showboating. Because it's obviously unconstitutional for Congress just to say that this is we're at war as a result. But what's funny is that Cotton presumably has ambitions to run for president, certainly in 2024, maybe 2028. That isn't a program that's going to win too many supporters in the United States. We're going to war with a nuclear superpower over Taiwan. What the hell is Taiwan anyway? I mean, you ask Americans, they have very little idea who, where, or what Taiwan is. So it's it's absolute lunacy. But that's the way the United States thinks, and that's why it tries to push its quote allies unquote into all these ridiculous conflicts. So when Stoltenberg announced yesterday, I think, that NATO is increasing its presence in Iraq either from 500 to 4,000. Europeans are going to, what the hell are we in for? Then we had the whole immigration, the mass migration flow of 2015. We want to start all that up again. It's nuts. But again, that's that transatlantic establishment, which is very dominant in Europe and which Europe should have tried to extirpate already decades ago before it became so powerful and so destructive of Europe's future.
I think it's very interesting, the timing of the Borrell visit and the tongue lashing that he got from Lavrov, which is very unusual for the Russian foreign minister. Yes. But I tend to think that the berating Borrell in Moscow for being a buffoon, which he was and is, I think it was a kind of a preamble to the Munich Security Conference, because the Russians know that the new president and his foreign policy team are making the calls right now. They know this is coming up, and they want to see who's, we got all our ducks lined up here. And I think personally, I think Lavrov is saying, no, don't see the world the way you want it. I'm telling you the way the world is. Okay. Now you all get together on your Zoom call and get back to us if it's worth our time. Okay. I don't think it's any coincidence, because the Russians are saying, look, whatever you want to shovel at us, we'll shovel back, because the world is moving on.
I think so, and I think that's the message that he delivered to Borrell, which is, if the European Union wants to follow this American Atlanticist agenda, fine, we're ready for this confrontation. But don't come to us and say, oh, we want to be partners with you. We want all these commercial energy relationships, and we want to work on this and that. And then the next day you turn around and start shaking your fist at us, talking about Navalny and fascist jackboots and so on. He said, we're tired of this. We're not going to play around with this. That's why I said the EU is an unreliable partner. You want a partnership with us, we'll be partners. If you want to play this sort of this Atlanticist game of threatening us, we're ready for that. But we're not going to do both at the same time.
One of the interesting things that's happening here in Russia right now, and Dima Babich is going to give me a complete debrief soon, is that there's some very prominent liberals, meaning anti-Kremlin, anti-Putin, okay, and people in the arts, or what they call the intelligentsia. There's a growing debate here about, should Russian liberals actually be aligned with the West because of all this wokeism and political correctness, and they're beginning to see like, whoa, we don't want that to come here. I mean, they have in a Russian context, which is a long conversation, but liberalism in a Russian context is different than in the West, okay? And it's very complicated, but it's very interesting that some major articles are coming out, and there's a growing discussion here, is that we believe in liberalism, but we don't want your cultural wars, not here.
No, I think that's right, and I think that's a reaction to the kind of wokeist lunacy that's dominant with the Biden people. I think there's a feeling, and that's, you're talking about Russian liberals. These are very pro-Western. They're not followers of Putin, and to a certain extent, that's even happening in Europe. I mean, even in France, they're saying,
yes, in France, yeah,
we don't want to go down this path. We're liberals, but this is nuts. What's going on in America right now? So that's another reason why I think Biden is going to find a difficult audience at the
well, it's kind of interesting. I guess he's going to be talking to a group of white supremacists, huh? By his own definition. There's this thing, what these leftists do, they just don't think it out. Okay, no. I mean, what they do is they show emotion, and that's the end. So I'm perfectly willing to accept that's the beginning of a conversation, but that's the end of the conversation.
Right, that's right. And you kind of think that, what Macron was thinking when he talked to Kamala Harris, and he listened to all this talk about diversity and the rest of the sort of wokest vocabulary. He must have thought, where the hell have I wandered into?
Can you give me a different translator? I don't know what this equity stuff is.
Exactly. Okay. All right, Peter, thank you. We will, of course, maintain our laser-like focus on the Munich Security Conference. And remember, we are on Rumble. So look us up on Rumble. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.